Welcome to Civic Hub, where local leadership meets big ideas. I'm Chris Marotti, and this is the podcast that brings you straight to the decision makers shaping our communities. Each episode, we sit down with local leaders, elected officials, and change makers to dive into the strategies, innovations, and challenges shaping the places we call home. On today's episode of Civic Hub, we sit down with Jesse Salinas from Yolo County, California, to discuss his role in local government and explore how he's driving youth voter engagement and wielding his skills as a legislative black belt. All right, well, today I have Jesse Salinas with Yolo County. Jesse, thank you for coming on Civic Hub.
Thank you, Chris, for having me.
Tell us about Yolo County and your role, because you have a variety of roles there, and let's just kind of quickly unpack what those roles are.
So my current job title is the Yolo County Assessor, Clerk-Recorder, and Elections Official. So we have come up with the acronym where we hyphenate the Clerk-Recorder and we call ourselves YOLO's ACE, because I thought that's a little smoother than Yolo Acre, and it has a nicer ring to it. And in that respect, we've identified that name for ourselves, and really that captures the epitome of what we want, which is to have excellence with integrity in all that we do. So that ACE kind of title captures that, along with our new logo that came in, that we designed when I first came into office.
Love it, love it. Now, California counties are unique that you guys can go in, modify your charters, essentially your constitution, to roll up, roll down offices. Do you know how long it's been those kind of roles have been combined, or is it, just kind of current history? Have you done any historical research to see how it was in 1850 when the county was incepted?
Right. I do know early on there were some positions that were a combination back in the 1800s and early 1900s, but really the combination of all of these is something that I believe it started in the 1990s. So it's not something that's that new in California. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of different hats that you're wearing. And so what we know is that in the assessor role that I have, it is one of the three constitutional positions that have to be an elected body. And it shows up in the California Constitution. It's the assessors, the district attorneys, and the sheriffs. And it's kind of a funny story how you go is they first they needed law and order, and they figured out, well, let's do the sheriffs because we need a sheriff. We need to get an elected body. Mm-hmm. And then they started capturing bad folks, and they go, well, we have to be able to prosecute them, so we need to get a district attorney. And then they figured out, well, we have to pay for it, so then they came up with the assessors. So the flow of that came out in that order, which is fascinating when you kind of do the research and find out the evolution of those three positions and why they're so critical. And even today, if you look at the assessor role, it is the fundamental basis of how local government is funded through property taxes and the valuation of those properties.
Yeah, it's the probably biggest driver of the general fund in most counties is the assessor's office.
Yeah, we're about 63% in Yolo County, so that gives you a context. And plus you impact school districts, you impact city councils, special districts. There's all these influences that the property tax base has an impact on in terms of funding.
When we zoom out and we look at Yolo County, you consider yourselves part of the CV, the Central Valley, right?
Yes, it's an extension. We're just outside. We're just west of Sacramento. So literally on the other side of the river. In fact, the former Oakland A's are moving into West Sacramento. So they're temporarily there until we're guessing they're going to make it out to Vegas, but maybe not. So
maybe they'll stay. Let's hope they'll stay.
They hope they'll stay. So we're right next to Sacramento. We're part of the whole Central Valley region. And actually, since we're also pretty connected, we have UC Davis, so a big university on campus, so in the county. So we also have a close connection with the Bay Area as well.
So do you see a lot of rural agriculture, mixed use, heavy industry? What would you consider kind of the makeup of the county?
Great question, because we are considered an ag county. We're very proud of the fact we've been an agricultural county. And yet we do have a large university that has a strong agricultural research base, well recognized internationally for the work we do with that. But in general, we have, a suburban community. We have more of an urban with West Sacramento. We have a mixture of kind of urban and rural, for example, in Woodland, and then we have more rural that are unincorporated areas. So I like to say that Yolo is really a microcosm of the state of California, because we have literally the rural, the urban, and the more suburban experience that you can find throughout California, all in Yolo County.
Yeah, you're the full spectrum of everybody, just kind of shrunk down.
Yep.
Now, when you look at that, that's, last population, last census, what were you guys kind of hovering around?
220,000.
Okay, so that's a medium-sized county, fairly large county.
Yeah, we've technically have just crossed over the medium size. We were smaller, right?
Yeah.
But once you start getting over 200,000,
Yeah, you're all medium.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're about that size.
Great. When we look at, your variety of roles, how do you run your week? When you've got, kind of 4 silos that you oversee, how do you even go about looking at that? And then to expand on that, how do you help people understand what you do in those roles?
So I don't see them as silos. It's part of why we call ourselves ACE.
Nice.
So if you were to come to my office, and inside of my assessor office, I have this concentric circles model, and it's 3 circles that overlap. And they do overlap because there are efforts that, for example, on the assessor side, we need the recordings from the recorder's office. That's once their official records and the property's been purchased, we need to transfer that information over to the assessor so they can reassess the property. So there's an overlap automatically that happens there. And oftentimes, clerks and elections have a strong overlap as well. In fact, a number of the offices in California have those same overlaps. So if you were to come to that office, you'd see that concentric circles. I talk about us really having all these overlap responsibilities and cross-training whenever we can. So during election season, it's kind of all hands on deck because there's a lot that's going on. And yet at the center point of that concentric circles is administration, which is my hat, the hat of my IT and finance people, because we are the ones that help the operation go. And I have an executive assistant that keeps me on track, keeps me on schedule, and I make sure that I try to visit my offices regularly, even though they're literally on different floors. I get a lot of steps in because I get to go up and down the stairs and go and engage with my staff and check in on them. And the idea is for us to feel as part of a one organization, not different departments. And in fact, because of that, I don't call us different departments, nor do I call us divisions. I think that's too divisive a word. So I refer to us as branches, because for me, it's an ag community. We're all part of the same family tree, and we're all here to bear fruit for our constituents and the community that we service. And so we think of ourselves as those branches as part of that holistic tree model. So yes, there's different functions, but there's opportunities to really cross-train and cross-pollinate, so to speak, in terms of our efforts together.
Yeah, removing those walls, probably has, understanding change management in the office, removing walls, getting a growing circular method, that's probably very good for the office at the end of the day.
It was not easy in the beginning.
Yeah.
It's funny because it was back in 2013 that Yolo County combined all those offices. And there was an election that was run. I was before my time. And the election happened in 2014. And the new person who won was sworn in 2015, January 2015. They did all these positions for a little less than a year, and they decided they were going to retire. And then the board decided, okay, we need to do a new search because this time it wasn't, the position was vacant. And so they did a national search. At the time, I was working for the county administrator's office in Yolo County. And I was, of course, overseeing a number of departments, and one of them was the assessor's office. And I was very familiar with the Clerk-Recorder office because I was also overseeing the master fee schedule for the county. I was also in charge of all the revenue projections for the county. So it was a number of roles that I held in the county administrator's office. And I had the opportunity to apply for the position because I had such familiarity with the different nuances of the offices. And through the national search, after it was all done, the board selected me, and I was actually appointed in 2016 So it was a pretty exciting time because I got a chance to do that for a couple of years right before a huge election. I was actually sworn in May of 2016, a month before the June 2016 primary election. So we'll get to that, I'm sure, in a little bit later.
Yeah.
That was a journey that was exciting in and of itself. So that's how I ended up in this position with the opportunity to kind of change the culture too, because it was still so new that the concentric circles model that I just described is something that I just had an aha moment, is how do I bring us together as one? And that vision came into play, and I brought it to the Board of Supervisors. I said, I've got a new vision for the organization, how I'm going to operate it. And their comment was, wow, I wish we had thought of that. That makes a lot of sense. And in addition, that's when the phrase, so I guess we can call Yolo's ace, right? And I'm like, I like that. That'll work.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great model to adopt and implement to just break those walls down and get everybody functioning as one community, one organization. Because at the end of the day, it's the same building. Everybody's going the same direction. So.
Absolutely. That's what you hope.
Yeah.
It's not always there. It takes a little while. Organizational theory will tell you it takes you anywhere from 3 to 5 years to change the culture of an organization. And I would say we fell into that time frame. The first couple of years was a bit challenging because people were having difficulty with the new model and the new leadership. But as a leader, you have to understand that you should expect that. There's no way things are just going to be embraced, because what you're bringing about is change. Any kind of new leadership will do that. And when you have that, as a result, people are going to have some pushback, because some people can adapt to change easier than others. And so you have to be patient and look at the long-term kind of planning of it, and you'll eventually get there if you stick with it.
Yeah. Linda, do you have any questions?
Yeah, definitely. So to kind of build on the analogy that you used about a tree, a limb that you've kind of really embraced is the relationship that your office has with the local community, specifically children. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the initiatives that you all have undertaken to sort of bring the work that you do into your local community in order to inspire them to take action and to dive deeper into understanding what it is that you do?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking the question, because I do have, as somebody who actually spent 20 years coaching soccer, I have a strong connection to the youth, and it was, before I took this job, once I took this job, I didn't have the capacity to continue doing the soccer, unfortunately, but knowing how important it is to engage our young people. And what I discovered early on in my tenure was, in fact, it was in 2016, I was at a conference and a presentation was made that was fascinating, that talked about how our 18 to 24-year-olds just were not participating at all, at a low level, especially after that 2014 election. It was horrific. Yeah. And I knew we were missing something. And it was, for me, a call to action. And how can I engage these young people? And I started really thinking about, well, I think there's two parts to it. One is we need to find out how voting is important to them and for them to understand that. But the other piece of the data point that I looked at is how people will actually participate in presidential elections. And when you get down to other elections, it drops down significantly, right? I mean, we're talking about big drop-offs. And you started seeing people get excited about the presidential, but not the others. And I realized, okay, we're missing the boat on being able to connect with young people and understanding how important those other elections are. And as somebody who, early in my career, I started with the California School Board Association, and I started understanding the importance of school boards. I then worked at the state capitol, for a couple of state senators, then worked in the nonprofit world, and then came back to local government where I was working at the county. But I've also been a chair of the Parks and Recs Commission and really enjoyed that experience in learning at the city level. I had a lot of experience, of course, at the county level, and realizing most folks in our society don't understand how local government functions and the significance it has in their everyday life. And I'm realizing there's an opportunity for us to start engaging young people. So I'm trying to made the connection here between young people and the lack of understanding of local government and how to access it and the power of it. And I try to connect the two dots by saying, okay, let me bring young people together. And I did this in 2017, so it was like at the end of my first year in office. And I had this concept where I wanted to do something called the Youth Empowerment Summit. And I brought together high school kids. I partnered with some folks that are working in the schools and with young people. And I said, I want to create a stage where young people can talk to elected officials, local elected officials. And so we had this concept of Youth Empowerment Summit, and we brought the first year it was some like 90 students in. And it was pretty amazing because it was an opportunity for young people to sit in a roundtable discussion with their local elected officials. We're talking school board members, city council members, county board of supervisors, the sheriff, the DA. And I said, let's have a dialogue. These are these people that have a lot of influence on you. You probably don't understand how much, but let me also talk to you about the governance structure of how, they have an administrator often at the county level. Whether it's a city, it's a city manager. At the county, it's a county administrator. And even at the school level, there's a superintendent. There's administrators, and then there's elected officials above them that, guess what? You get to elect them if you participate in the elections. And these are the kinds of impacts they have on them every day. So when I thought about, okay, how do I relay that to them? I wanted to give them an environment where they can sit down and just remove the barriers, that these elected officials aren't these far-off individuals that they'll never get to meet. I wanted them to have that intimate conversation with them. So we created that first Youth Empowerment Summit, and it was a huge success. Huge success.
What were the participation rates on that one?
So we had about 90 young folks, and they were all high school. So it was from freshmen to seniors, ninth graders all the way up to 12th graders in that scope. But what I had made personal calls to elected officials. Now, the nice thing is because I was the election officials, I had the ability to contact the elected officials. So I made personal calls. And I have this summit I'm putting together. And I have to tell you, they were really warm and embracing. Like, that sounds like a great idea. I'd like to come. And I had over 20 that showed up, 20 elected officials that came out that first time. Well, let's put it this way. When word got out, I got 25 the next year. And so much so that over time, we're about to have our 8th annual one that we're doing. And now our goal is to invite 200 students from across the county. Mm-hmm. And the last number of the local elected officials that I got to show up was nearly 30. Wow. And so word's out. This is a place to be. We've actually won a national award through the Election Center on that Youth Empowerment Summit. So it's called the Guardian Award. So people have recognized us nationally. And we have a wonderful website, yolosays.yes.com. And you can see a video of where we're engaging young people and having them talk about how they view things and giving them respect and value. Plus, we do a mock election, and we get them to see, and we design a ballot that looks like an official-looking ballot, and so they get to vote, and then we give them results right there. And we've evolved over time, because in the beginning, when I was starting out so roughly, I was like, I'll let them vote on pizza. What kind of pizza, right? And then as it started to evolve, like in the last 2 times that we've done it, we get national data of what young people think about on key issues, whether it's about AI, whether it's topics that they care about, climate change. And we have data, national data, that we let them vote on these topics. We ask the same questions, and then we let them compare how they compare to both national data, state data, and local data, so they can see themselves in comparison. And you start to realize each community is different in how they view things. And there's times where you look up and you're like, okay, this is probably going to be this outcome. And then the outcome of the turnout is like, okay, I wasn't expecting that. And it's great because sometimes you see students go, when they see the results of their own election. And you start to realize they have a different view. And it's wonderful to see, right? Because part of what I start to do is I then say, and this is like, numbers have been picked up, by the way, in Yolo County significantly. We're doing well in that younger group compared to the rest of the state. I would have people like when we got to 100 students, I'd say, okay, half of you stand up, great, thanks for doing it, and half of you sit down, because first of all, of 100, half of you, sit down because you haven't even bothered to register, right? You're not even bothering, you don't care. And then of the remaining 50, half of you sit down because you didn't even bother to vote. And then the rest of you, you get to dictate everything else of all these elected officials because you're the only ones that voted. Mm-hmm. And how about you, the other 75 that are sitting down? How do you feel? Like, that's not fair. And get involved, vote, right? But beyond that, how do you make a difference in your community? And so that's part of what we started to do. And we started to say, okay, I started seeing early on after that first Youth Empowerment Summit that it was only going to impact 100, 200 kids. I knew, because the capacity issue, right? Because there's only so many kids you can invite. So that's when the thought came to me. It's like, okay, how do I do more? How do I impact more students, not just the few? And in fact, we were on a Saturday when we started doing it the first couple of years, getting students to come in on a Saturday. And I said, okay, how about if I do it on a Friday? And I tried to engage during the schools and bring in schools and, get them more involved. And as part of it, I also said, okay, how do I also start to change the curriculum so we can get a better understanding? In our typical curriculum in the schools, we focus on what we call that 3 branches of government, right? That's what you see traditionally. There's very little that's done to talk about local government and how impactful it is and how it's 3 votes typically that you're talking about and how you can get to know your city council member or your school board member and to become more engaged at that local level, even at the county level. It's typically 5 votes and the impact it has if you're in an unincorporated area. So to understand the difference between a city and an unincorporated area and who to go to if you have issues or concerns and you want to have your voice said, we said we knew we had to create a new curriculum. And so I started designing with the County Office of Education and UC Davis, the Social History Science Project, which does curriculum development because we have UC Davis there in Yolo County. So I leveraged those relationships and we started expanding the possibility of what could be more and engaging that. So we got some funding from a foundation that was very generous, and the James B. McClatchy Foundation gave us some initial funding, and we started putting the framework of that together in partnership with these different partners. And we also actually brought in somebody from Texas. It's a professor, Kevin McGill, who's an amazing professor who's doing work in civic engagement and work in the academic world and research. And he's out of Baylor University. And he actually was from Davis originally, and so we reconnected and talked about this project. And he goes, I want to be a part of it because I wanted to bring research. I want to get the pedagogy of that. I wanted to bring in the people who know how to write curriculums, the County Office of Education, because they've got the connections of all the faculty. They've got the superintendent connections. They've got, the connections in the school districts. And I wanted to meld them all together so that we can start to create this new curriculum. So we do have a curriculum that we've started to draft. We're piloting it right now in Yolo County. And the goal would be to have it throughout all of the county. So if we hit every high school and every high school is implementing this as our plan is, now I'm talking not 100 kids, but 10,000 kids. That's, just an incredible X factor that I am excited about because I know others, legislative members have paid attention to this. They are excited about it. There's other registrars across the state that have indicated an interest. So our goal is to pilot this and then to actually eventually, there's another foundation that's indicated an interest of also wanting to support it because the other one has, moved on from our support, but we've gotten some local support from the county, County Office of Education, the County Board of Supervisors has provided us some funding, but we have another foundation that has indicated an interest because they like the scalability of this and they love the idea of the engagement of our youth in a way that puts it in the classroom to help them then go out in the community and make change in a way that gives them a voice. And so I knew that to me was a game changer. And it's again, I want people to understand the beauty of local government and the power of local government and how your voice matters. And if you know how to use it and use it effectively, you can transform your community by really getting involved. Not just voting, but getting involved. And so we're really excited about the pilot and where it's going. And eventually our goal is to introduce legislation to hopefully expand it throughout California and then take it to other. That's why Baylor's involved with this, because we want to take it to other states and really show that this is a product that should be scalable and helpful, because our young people need to know that things are not hopeless. But you have to be given the tools and the knowledge to how to use it in such a way that you can not only have a voice, but again, transform your community in a very dynamic and synergistic way, because that's where I wanted to go through the curriculum. Just given my educational background, I just knew that was the big gain and how to do it. So that's one of my pet projects that I've been working on.
Yeah, that's just fascinating. You know, part of being a great leader is building awareness, finding creative and unique ways for engagement that's sticky. And that sounds like it hits both those buckets straight on. And if it is scalable and adopted, the change that could come to the broader audience is, you know, really groundbreaking.
Yeah, that's my hope.
Yeah.
That's my hope. Yeah. But I also have some other hats that I wear. That's just in the elections world. You know, on the recorder world, I'm pretty proud of the work we've done on restrictive covenants. So there's a story to be told there too. So I know we have, you know, so a little bit more time. So I'd love to be able to continue to share different stories.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm fortunate enough to interact with a lot of elected officials and county officials. And for the last 20 months, I've been hearing about, you know, your House Bill AB 1466. So unpack that. Let's dive into that, and just how is that affecting your community? How does it affect your role? What are the implications financially? And just when these laws are created and implemented, how does that affect your office?
Well, I'll tell you about the genesis. It actually started in Yolo County. So most folks don't know that. It started because I got a document that was a restrictive covenant type of document that somebody was appalled about some verbiage that was on their deed of record. And as I looked at it, it talked about a certain group of individuals not being able to live in a certain community, and they were appalled, and they said, I want that redacted. And it was the first time I'd seen it, and this was before the pandemic. And I was also appalled because it was a community that I had raised my family in and didn't know that that was still existed, that language. And I did a little bit more research and say, yeah, it's not, it has no legal bearing, but it's still in some of our records, I was told. And I'm going, really? Well, I need to change that. And so I said, okay, we'll help them redact it. And because of the fees that we had in place, the recorder has a fee that they charge, and we also have a fraud fee through the district attorney's office that we would charge onto those documents to be able to redact it. So I called the DA and I said, are you okay with waiving your fee? Because this person has this language. We want to help them redact it. I don't want to have to charge them for that because it shouldn't, you know, we should do that. And he was all on board. He goes, absolutely, Jesse, that's a great idea. I'm on board. I then had to go to the Board of Supervisors to request a waiver. One of my past jobs, I think I told you, was I was in charge of the master fee schedule, so I knew the process, and I knew that because I'd actually written the waiver that you had to go to the board to be able to request to waive such a fee. So I went to the board and I said, I also need to ask your permission to waive the fee. This is the topic. It was fascinating because in the report that I submitted to the Board of Supervisors, I also shared that there was a Senate Bill 2, which was an affordable housing bill that was charging a $75 fee. And the chair at the time asked, well, why don't you waiving that? And I said, I don't have the authority to waive that because it is a state-mandated fee. He goes, well, you should consider introducing legislation. Great idea. Done. So with that, I went and tracked down our assembly member to talk to them because he'd given a speech on that topic like a few months earlier. And I said, I'd like to be able to work with you all to develop some legislation so we can waive the affordable housing fee aspect. That was my focus because I wanted to make sure that we weren't charging people to be able to remove and redact it. Well, as the evolution of that piece of legislation happened, there was a lot of pushback because I tried to bring in my recorder association wearing my recorder hat. And you'd be surprised, there were individuals that were very upset with me that I was now advocating that there's an opportunity for us to play an important role in this. We are the official record keepers, and so how to do that. And I can tell you right now, I had, on Zoom calls, because this is during the pandemic and we were executing this, some of my colleagues yelling at me on these meetings saying, why are you doing this?
It's a hot button topic.
It is a very hot button topic. And it was, the verbiage is, we don't want to be on the wrong side of history on this. I mean, this is, and part of the negotiations as we were developing it was we wanted to still maintain the original records. So what came out of that is we can go in, and there's a whole process. We have to take it in and validate it, and I'll talk a little bit what steps we're taking to do that right now. And we wanted to make sure that we would be able to redact it if it was acknowledged that this was language that should be removed, but keep the original version still available. So you think about a piece of paper, if you have a redactor and you lay it over the original one, if you ever want to remove the top page, you can still see the original language. Because to me, I knew it was important to keep that in place because we can't erase history. We shouldn't, I don't think. I think we learn from history, and it's important to acknowledge it so that we can, if there were mistakes that were made in the past, how are we going to learn and improve unless we can face the issues that we have not wanted to confront in the past? But that's okay. That's how we grow. And so we wanted to make sure that was still available because we have people who are archivists or historians that would like to see the original documentation, and we wanted to make sure that's still available. So it was kind of the best of both worlds. There was a lot of pushing and shoving and this and that on and negotiations of it. I had hoped that the title companies would take it over as things are coming in and moving it forward, but they have they have a little bit more leverage in the capital than recorders. And
how did the title industry react
when we pushed about wanting them to take it, because we thought that was the appropriate, at least moving forward? Because at the end of the day, they reviewed the legal documentation, and frankly, they were just kind of having it processed through. They weren't necessarily, hey, that language really is old and it should be removed. They weren't doing it. So that's where we thought that would be the natural, we can look at it historically, but you can get everything moving forward. But and like I said, we didn't quite have that juice in the Capitol. So they didn't want to really have to do that. And so they said, no, we think it should be you all that do all of it. And so that created a different kind of challenge because then we had to figure out how we would pay for it. And so we talked about having a fee that was a fee to be able to charge, to be able to take care of the records and being able to update them. Because what it would require is really an ability to digitize the records, doing some OCR, and then being able to really review and flag those languages, because that's the only way you can do it, because it's millions of documents. You can't, doing it manually is not really an option. So we knew that was the evolution, and quite frankly, most recorders, at least in California, are trying to digitize their documents, or they've done it already. So it was not a far step, because it is the evolution of kind of technology and needing to do that. So there's other benefits to digitizing your documents as much as possible. But the beauty of that is that we learned that as much as people didn't think there was a lot of that out there, it turns out there was quite a few out there. And we are going back to 1850. So we're finishing up. And in fact, right now, we are partnering with Stanford University because they're using some, with us in another county in California, they're helping us to use some pretty advanced software to be able to identify the language, so there's not a lot of false positives. So we just actually shared the documents for them to start doing their review of it. So we're excited about that. What we've done is we've also partnered with our GIS team. So our goal is this summer to be done with our project, which is pretty early in the process. Of course, I was kind of involved in the ground level, so I know exactly what was coming and how to do it. And the beauty of it is we're going to have this time lapse. And I got the idea from Marin County, so I had to give Marin County props.
So are you overlaying the data onto a GIS model to see the evolution?
Yes.
That's fascinating.
It is going to have a time time lapse that'll start from 1850 and take you all the way to today.
That's a first in the nation, I think.
Yeah. I got to give props. Marin came up with it first. I saw Marin and I told Shelley, my good friend there, I said, Shelley, I'm gonna follow your tracks.
Steal that.
Steal that. But that's what we do. We share good ideas with one another. And I was busy negotiating in the building, and others have. And I say the building, the Capitol on the legislation. And there's another county that got a jump start on me. But I think we might be finished completely first, just because. I think we have a good game plan. Like I said, hopefully this summer we'll be done, and I think that's pretty significant. So I've had people who found out the role that I've played in this in other states and have called me and talked to me about the legislative effort. And part of it is, it was a journey. It was not easy, and it, there were things if I could have done things differently, if I was the one that was making all the decisions, it, might have been modified a bit, right? Like I said, I think there was an opportunity to kind of share the responsibilities with the title companies in such a way that we both benefit from it, because it's doing their responsibilities, we do our responsibilities, and we collaborate. It didn't quite work out the way I would have liked, but in my mind, I look at it as we did something that was significant. So when I know that whole movement, this was before we started that process, before it was making national news and people were talking about it, and it started in Yolo County.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so it's a proud moment, because most people I had a board member that said, Jesse, this is huge. This is significant. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And it's part of our little story here in Yolo that we're doing a lot of
It'll eventually scale to the nation.
Yes.
We're seeing it more and more. I get to see backstage the language learning models that they're developing and how to process and use multiple AI engines to build out the language learning models. It's really fascinating to see. And to know that it started in Yolo, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Very, very neat. Elected officials always have trouble with, going down those avenues of how do I get legislation? I have an idea. How do I go through and get legislation passed? We've both been to these conferences. Linda was at a conference this week, focused a little bit on AI. But some of the big burning questions, like how do I have a great idea. How do I enact legislation? Can you just, since you've done it, what would be the few tips that you could give maybe some of your peers out there that are listening, the kind of a quick roadmap of this is my roadmap. Who do you have to engage? Kind of time frames.
Sure. Happy to do that. So I think there's a couple of elements. One is I would always encourage people. It gets back to the local connection and the relationships. If you don't know your local elected official, you need to get to know them. And if we're talking state legislation, for example, that's where I have my extensive knowledge, having worked in the Capitol. And it's, if you don't know your local assembly member or state senator, build a relationship. They typically will come to your district office and they want to get connected into with their constituents and their local community. But it's about building a relationship so that you can talk to them not only about ideas that you may have for introducing legislation, because there's something people don't understand. Well, I've run across this issue. I'm so frustrated. And they don't realize, well, if it's related to state law, you can rewrite state law.
Yeah.
And if you know, and you can talk to your representatives and saying, this is a problem, and I think we can solve this with the following piece of legislation. So I think that's one avenue that's there. The other one is working with your statewide association. I'm currently serving as president of the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials. And it's really using the importance of that association to not only share ideas and then have that association help introduce legislation to improve the process of whatever work you're doing. But it's really about also leveraging the respectability of your profession. Because as people at the state level, there's a lot of smart people there, but they're not the specialist. And so you really need to see yourself as the specialist that can answer those questions. And for me, you know, I wear so many hats that I really have staff that have been doing stuff for 20 plus years. And they know the details more than I do because they've been living it day to day. I may see things on a broader scale as we've been talking about, and I see the larger trends that I want to try and really, you know, galvanize support and get coalitions built to be able to make a difference. But you have access. If you're a local elected official, you don't always have to have all the answers, and that's okay, but you know people who do. And you need to lean into that, and you need to use that as a resource and offer it as a resource as you are building your network with your elected officials, because you want them to feel like they can come to you, just like they can come to the associations, that relationship, so that you can then introduce legislation. There's usually a timeline, right? They're going to start introducing legislation at the start of the year, and they have a deadline where all legislation has to be introduced. But it's got to be, at least in California, there's, you know, I'm sure it's very consistent across the states, is that you're going to have deadlines where you're going to have a draft piece of legislation. It has to, something of a concept paper gets introduced. It gets then drafted into a piece of legislation. I guess thinking about the whole, you know, I'm Just a Bill back in the day. It's one of my favorite cartoons. But the whole point is before it even gets there, it's given over to what's called legislative council, and they draft those ideas into actual legislation that then can be introduced. And there's a policy deadline that introduction deadline, and then there's going to be a policy deadline for things to get done. If it's just a policy piece, if it has a financial piece, then it goes, there's it's called an appropriations deadline. So it's a finance piece of it. And then that's just getting through the first house. It's then got to get to the other house and eventually make it to the governor. But if you sit there and actually understand the importance of the relationship, your insights of how things work and how to share that to the right people at the right time, they may ask you to come in and provide testimony so you can have an impact on legislation, because at the end of the day, I always talk about us being the truth tellers. We are here to tell the truth of how things operate, how it affects us, and if there's things that are being suggested that are going to be negatively impacted, that we can share that. So at least the policymakers, when they're making their decision, they're not doing it in a vacuum. They have the information they need. And I just remember when I was in the building, the Capitol in Sacramento, how important it was to have information, right? Information just guides you to a better decision-making place. So I really lean into all of those elected officials. You know, if you don't, it's amazing how many elected officials really haven't spent the time building those relationships with their statewide officials. And you should, because you are a resource, and you want that. You want them to see you as that resource and as a local leader that they can turn to for, you know, ideas or how to solve problems, because, you know, we are not just the truth tellers, we're problem solvers. And that's how I like to look at ourselves at the local level, because we're on the ground floor where things happen and impact people. And sometimes at the state level, you're dealing with the broader policies, but where it typically happens is at the local jurisdiction.
Yeah. Well, that's great. You know, I think we're probably going to wrap it up there, but what I've heard today is just, you know, all the traits of a great leader, you know, awareness, engagement, being a connector, and breaking down walls, you know. So thank you for coming on, Jesse. Thank you for sharing your stories, because the power of story is really to memorialize what you've done, to bring it to a broader audience. You know, at the local level, that's how change happens. And it can be such a positive change map. It's going to be really looking forward to seeing what you're doing in Yolo County.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me today.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh my gosh.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mic check. It's co-file Chris with the clarity, breaking down the system like a tech barbarity. Civic hubs live, surfing knowledge like a tsunami, rolling through the info smooth Maserati. Civic vibes, we innovate and elevate. Local government shift, let's recalibrate. Tech meets transparency, the gap we abbreviate. Civic hub anthem, come participate. Street Lights buzzing, city halls we navigate. Machines in the council throwing out the candidate. Blockchain buzzing, Chris gonna moderate. Algorithm steering votes, lines automate. Plug in, gather round his pod like it's holy. Future blueprint drafted digitally solely. Ideas hatch quick, think it's gotta be Goldie. The Civic Hub thrives where the minds are moldy. Policy precision sharper than a switchblade. Red tape slayer, break it open with the upgrade. AI council, tech dreams don't cascade. We building the future, bricks cut from the data spade.